Good day, everyone. Amy Calvert, CEO of the Events Industry Council. It's really a pleasure to welcome you all here today to our inaugural event for the Events Industry Council, EIC Advance. And it's very intentional that this session is our opening session. We are hosting a really generous and really interactive session around the importance of global advocacy. I'm really pleased and grateful that our panelists today have made time for this discussion. All of them have been doing great work over this past year to ensure that we are unified and we are aligned in our commitment. And I think that's one of the things that I found so personally inspiring during this time. We know that on behalf of our 26 million professionals that comprise our industry, now more than ever, we have to be our own best storytellers, our own best champions as we think about what's next and really coming out of this stronger, more committed to our values and those things that we know to be true, and that business events not only drive outcomes, but they really help to build communities. And with that, I think it's really timely and important that we host this discussion and inspire all of you to be part of that conversation, because we know with advocacy, it's an important part of our daily mantra as professionals. And we are really looking forward to ensuring that that is one of the key outcomes, not only for this session, but one of the learnings for all of us as we think about the road to our future. So with that, it's really a pleasure and a privilege, as I've said, to welcome this fantastic panel. I'm going to be turning it over to Karina Bauer, President and CEO of IMEX Group. And I know she's going to lead you through a really fantastic conversation today. Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to be with you from the UK today. We've got an amazing panel from all across the world, so I'd like to thank them as well for joining us. Rather than go through each member of the panel in order, you can see that on your screen, but what I'd like to do is actually turn it over to each member of the panel to just briefly introduce yourself and also just talk us through very quickly what are the most important elements to promote recovery that we as an industry can address collectively. So Kai, I'd like to come to you first, if I may. You represent UFI, the Global Association for the Exhibition Industry, as well as JMIC, the Joint Meetings Industry Council. So why don't you kick us off?
Well, thanks, Karina, and good to see you all screen to screen, and good evening, good day, good morning to everyone watching this. Now, what can we do together to help our industry to build back better or to come out of this stronger? I think we've been as united as never before this year, finding a shared voice in our industry, centering on some simple messages. For us in the exhibition side and the conference industry, adjusted in most parts of the business events industry, we have a very simple message. It is that we build the meeting places and the marketplaces that every industry, every sector, every profession needs to come back together on the other side of the pandemic, to restart, to rebound their respective businesses, to come back stronger and build back better. So we are the fastest of all fast tracks to economic recovery. And that's a message we need to get across to the authorities and policymakers. And likewise, to prove that we can run events safely. And on the exhibition side, for sure, if you look to Asia, all the shows that have taken place in between these lockdowns that we're experiencing in some parts of Europe in recent months, we have a solid track record of hundreds of shows that have taken place successfully.
Thank you, Kai. And that's a great introduction, I think, to Aloysius. So maybe you could tell us just briefly about yourself, your organization, and your perspective from Asia.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and good evening from Singapore. Pleasure to join everyone. Good to see everyone face to face. I'm the president for SASIOS. SASIOS stands for the Singapore Association for the Conventions, Exhibition, Organizers and Suppliers. It is the National Trade Association for the Business Events or MICE industry here in Singapore. And I couldn't agree more with Kai. This COVID-19 has brought us, I think, together associations within the country as well as across globally. But I think what's important is that COVID-19 has pointed the finger on our strengths, our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities and our shortcomings. And if you were to take a step back, we see that there are certainly both gaps in expertise. There are also strength in our collective wisdom. I think that is what has brought us together near and far in terms of how best can we address this pandemic. Indeed, we will need different strokes for different folks, but I think the principle of cooperation and collaboration has never been so much underscored in this COVID-19. And I think also that what's important moving forward is that we do not take this as a stopgap measure. We need to continue to work even closer together, collaboratively, both within our jurisdictions, but also across the different associations. And I think together we can certainly emerge stronger. And Singapore, because we are so small and we depend so much on international visitorship, when travel restrictions were in place and borders were closed, and we certainly cannot rely on the market. So we needed to work very hard in order to ensure that we can reopen and reboot our industry as soon as we can. And that's something where we have gone into a series of pilots, and I'm glad to share a little bit more later on. But I think what has happened also is in the context of rolling out these pilot events in order to restart our industry, as I said earlier, it helps us to understand where our weaknesses lie and what are some of the gaps we will need to plug as an industry. And we're very fortunate and thankful to the government as well as to the industry players, both the SMEs as well as large companies who banded together, we hunkered down in order to survive, and certainly we're looking to thrive in a post-COVID era.
Jumping across the pond to Washington DC, Elliot, you're representing both Washington and US travel, so maybe you could give us your thoughts as well.
Absolutely, and I extend greetings to the audience as well, no matter what time of day. I think it's pretty obvious to us that from a global perspective, the world has seen the good and bad in terms of how the U.S. has handled COVID, and unfortunately, the politics associated with how it was handled. I think there's, I'm a glass half full person. And right now, as we're looking at cases continuing to rise again, we were thinking that we were perhaps going to be on the other end of COVID, and that might not necessarily be the case. But I think the race for all of us in the U.S. is to try not to go back to a total shutdown phase, which no city wants that. I think from the U.S. Travel Association's perspective and from the perspective of our organization, the thing that has elevated our industry is the fact that, we are an industry that has done extremely well from an economic perspective, creating jobs, creating economic opportunities within communities, but not necessarily seen in the same regard as other key industries in the U.S. And I think with COVID, that's changed a lot. I think we all recognize what happens when people don't come and how that affects our economies as a whole. So, we've all gone through phases of denial, of shock, and then trying to manage in the dark, which is not easy. And, now we all want a crystal ball to figure out what's going to happen next, and that's not very reliable. So now we're doing what we need to do, which is find ways to have meetings. In Washington, we have a component in our convention center. Other cities globally have done the same. We've followed suit and as to what has happened from a global perspective. And then to try to make sure that as we prepare for our new president and a new Congress and whatever the outcome of our Senate race in January, that we focus on incentives to jumpstart our industry and ways in which we can not only focus on safety and be consistent, because as we know in the U.S., there's 50 states and the District of Columbia. And in that regard, each state can have its own policies, which has not worked. So we're hoping and we're encouraged by U.S. travel already interfacing with the incoming administration that we will be focusing on consistency in terms of policies tied to safety so that we can continue to find a way to get back on track as we focus on a vaccine.
From a venue perspective, Brad, can we move across to you?
Well, thank you, Karina. And I'm honored to be on this panel with all these incredible executives. Great brain trust, and really appreciate all of the efforts that they've collectively put together. I think it's all about building trust through our collective positive actions towards hosting events safely. And that's not going to be easy, but it's definitely possible, and we've taken some great steps in doing that. Coordinating our efforts and speaking with one voice on key topics, and educating the public and the public authorities. As Elliot said, each of the states have different guidelines and responses to when and how we can open, but educating the public and public authorities about the economic engine that our industry creates. You think about it, the United States government is focused on small businesses, and our ecosystem is full of small businesses. And those businesses are not working because we're not hosting events in most states. So working together to create and assist the international economic recovery is really going to be important.
Sue, maybe you could just explain a little bit about, introduce yourself, and also what you've been doing with Freeman and Go Live Together.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me here. Glad to be with this panel. So Go Live Together is a coalition. I mean, Freeman, given its position in the industry, had the opportunity to build a lot of relationships across the ecosystem, as was described earlier. And, so we started Go Live as a means of collecting and amplifying all the great work. This started in early April, late March, when the pandemic was really first starting to hit the United States. And, it's since ballooned, I think, in terms of kicking us off. Kai was, mentioning everybody coming together, right? I mean, the show of support, the folks on this panel, everybody's, what can I do to help? And so I think that's been absolutely tremendous. And I can just echo what everyone else has said from our point of view going forward as an industry. The U.S. was behind Europe in terms of having awareness with legislators about what our industry is, how big it is, the economic impact. We're starting to see some consistency in terms of global languages, right? In terms of marketplaces. We touch every sector of the GDP. We are in the United States made up of small businesses. 99% of, businesses are small. So I think that's one thing that we really need to carry forward is, making them aware of our industry and just the economic impact and, all throughout the chain when you talk about travel and hotel and these venues and the show organizers and the electricians and the plumbers and the florists and everybody else who works in it. I think that's been eye-opening through this process. So that's critical. And I think our immediate need, given the trajectory of the pandemic here in the U.S., is really to get participant confidence, to get legislator confidence. Thankfully, we do have a lot of examples where events can demonstrate our ability to have controlled gatherings, to gather safely, that can help with health officials as well as the participants to say, hey, I can, and the venues themselves, as well as the show organizers, have invested hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in enhanced cleaning, GVAC certification, upgrading their HVAC systems, rapid testing. I mean, we're doing everything within our control. So, I have a lot of confidence in returning. So hopefully we can continue that message.
Going across to Susan, obviously representing the association world, what is your view on the most important elements to promote recovery that we can address collectively?
Thanks, Karina. Well, there's no question that associations around the world, not just in the U.S., have been impacted severely. Let's face it, I don't think any of us expected this to last as long as it has. And, although there's some hope on the horizon, we expect it to last longer. And our revenue streams as an association are very much dependent on face-to-face meetings. So no one is more eager to return to face-to-face, both small and large. as associations. You know, we do a lot of data collecting on how associations are faring during this COVID. And, you know, there are some that have lost up to 70% of their revenue. Some, more than 25% report that they don't have the reserves to make it through should this go another year. So we're really on the brink, and yet hopeful that we can start to scale up face-to-face meetings. There are associations who are doing that now through hybrid events. There's certainly smaller events and like planning to events. But here's what I would say overall, and I think it's a theme that I've heard throughout with my colleagues' introductions, is we're very dependent on each other to make this work. And so far as associations are concerned, it means planning meetings in a way that we haven't before. You know, sure, we've worked with venues, with convention centers, with the destinations to have a wonderful annual meeting or a wonderful conference, but we need now to work together to tell a story to our attendees that would encourage them to attend. We have to overcome the barrier or the bias that it isn't safe to travel, and then once you're where you're supposed to be, that it's safe to be there. So there's a whole new story that has to be created and woven, and that's going to take cooperation with the destination, with the convention center, with all the venues, with all the safety precautions that have been installed or implemented in a city or in a destination to really create a story where an attendee says, yep, this is the one. I'm going to attend face-to-face, seems good to me, because we know that the appetite is there. I'll end my comments on a very positive note that, you know, we see how much people miss face-to-face. They want to meet face-to-face. They want community around face-to-face. I do think it's going to change how we use face-to-face meetings going forward. You know, this pandemic has actually, I think, surfaced some things that we needed to correct anyway, and we probably could ignore because pre-COVID, we didn't need to pay attention to some of those things. Where a lot of us are a lot leaner, we're doing things differently. I don't expect that to change coming out of this. But I do expect that, you know, face-to-face meetings will be used a little bit differently, complemented always by virtual. That's, I think, with us to stay. But again, it's a community that needs to tell a story to an attendee who needs to get on a plane and come to a meeting. And that's the story we need to create together.
And going across to Chris, you're based in the UK, so what the landscape is a little bit differently. So how do you see the recovery and what we can address collectively?
Thank you, Karina, and thank you for the invitation to the panel. Hi, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be last after everybody else has stolen all of your notes and all the things that you wanted to say. So I'd echo the economic case, the safety case, the unity, the collaboration that we've seen. But I think in the UK, what's been fascinating is you look at other sectors, and over the years, the amount of time and energy and resources that they put into public affairs, into working with government. I mean, we're lucky we've just got one. And even though the politicians change frequently, the government officials are there for quite a while. So I think what we probably learned through this pandemic is that probably our sole objective to begin with before the pandemic was to leave us alone to get on and do business. We're very independent, so just don't put barriers in our way. And we had quite a hard barrier in March where we've not been able to run events since then, which is quite important. And we've moved from that sort of underappreciation, undervalued nature of what the event industry can bring, not only to ourselves and our own supply chains, but I think we've also learned the interconnectivity of all of our activations, not only on hospitality, travel, tourism, but also in the markets that we serve. And so I think we've got into a great foundations. You know, we've gone from 0 to 100 miles an hour in 7 months. We've gone from a loose connection with some fairly junior officials right the way through to Boris and straight into the heart of number 10. To the point where I've got more NDAs sitting on my desk on things I can't talk about, which I'd love to, than we've ever had before. So I think we're definitely being positioned as part of the solution and part of the way that we can kickstart the economy and drive that economic growth within the markets that we serve. But I think we've we've sort of probably been a bit more appreciated, to use one of Kai's phrases. We've been a bit of a sleeping giant. We've been quietly being left to get on with it in the UK. We don't have government-owned venues. We don't have government-owned organisers, so the structure is very different. But we've certainly been pushing these fantastic foundations that we've got going forward. And I think the opportunities are amazing, not only in developing our products, as Susan has commented on, so, using a digital engagement, creating more touch points, more value for our customers, more opportunities to talk to them. A few years ago, somebody said to me, you can't talk to your customer more than the 3 days of the show, because that's what they've signed up for. I think we've learned from this, our customers are desperate to talk to us all year. So we now have that permission. So we've got fantastic foundations in terms of our proposition. I think we've got fantastic foundations in relation to government and our understanding and their need for us. And certainly at the moment in the UK, it feels that we're really embedded in the future, into the sort of not only the reopening, but also the recovery and potentially, however much longer it goes on, the relaunch of the sector. So I feel quite buoyed and happy. That's some great news this week. We've had some good pilot testing. We've had some good vaccine news. So we're all in a good mood, and the sun's out in London. So that's really good. But yeah, so we're buoyed by the future.
Thank you, Chris. So that's a good note to sort of end the first collective industry question. I'm interested, Sue, with the Go Live Together coalition that you've explained a little bit about, what do you see as the next steps in an advocacy campaign on that?
Yeah, so I think Susan had said it. I don't think any of us expected it to be going on this long. When we started, it was with an eye towards recovery in fall. As we look forward, I think the main thing is, we're recognizing this is a marathon, not a sprint, that we've done a lot of great work over the last 8 months. It's going to be important that we maintain that momentum going forward. Short term, in terms of the advocacy, I think, Elliot was talking about what was happening in DC. We're still continuing dialogue with our champions. We're still keeping an eye on the relief funding with the incoming administration and and the president-elect's transition team. It's, we're still hopeful that this Congress can still get something done in the next couple of months, but also with an eye towards the new Congress and getting back to work. So, anything we can do to try to maintain that momentum to allow us to go forward, not backwards, even if it is baby steps. But as Kai said, we don't want a complete shutdown. We're mindful of the rising cases and certainly don't want to reopen prematurely, but I think we have a lot of models for how we can keep the economy open without increasing the health risks to the population.
Thank you, Sue. And obviously travel and the resumption of travel is one of the key ways we're going to be able to run our international events. So in terms of the US Travel Association, Elliot, what are the efforts globally to promote the resumption of business travel and also the promotion of those consistent policies, which are going to be so important for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Very good question. I think the key thing for us as a destination management organization, as the United States government has been offering incentives to keep businesses afloat, unfortunately, DMOs have not qualified for that protection, that economic stimulus in which we needed. So, I'm pushing, and I know U.S. Travel is pushing to make sure that in the next iteration of PPP, we are part of that equation, because we desperately, at whatever point, including now, we're going to have to get back to the business of promoting our destinations. And, we're all crippled in regards to being able to do that, because we're, private nonprofits. We don't have the funding if we don't get, individuals coming to our destinations. So we're really pushing for that. The U.S. Travel Association is also focusing on ways to get travelers back out there traveling again, and therefore asking the U.S. government to offer incentives for individuals to get out and travel again, offering incentives for individuals to start meeting again, tax incentives in that regard, which we think is really important. everything we can do to jumpstart the economy from that perspective. I think some of the other key things is that, we recognize that unfortunately, international travel to the U.S. is going to be crippled for a while. We see some opportunities, especially with the flight that United is testing from London Heathrow to Newark with testing policies, and that's very promising. And we're hoping that that will continue to manifest in a way whereas we can open up our borders, hopefully before we have a vaccine, even though it seems as if we're getting to the finish line of having a vaccine. So fingers crossed there. And, in that regard, the U.S. Travel Association has already launched a Let's Go There and Let's Meet There campaign. In a case like Washington, D.C., we have 50 million people that live within 250 miles. I don't know what that is in kilometers of our city. So that's about a 4.5, 5-hour drive. So we are, in addition to continuously focusing on our international efforts, but not necessarily in the same vein that we normally do, we're looking inward in terms of the opportunities to get folks to come in, heads in beds, butts in seats, eating in our restaurants. We have things that are open in the city, and we're working to keep those things open. I think the key thing that we're saying to all of our venues and to every hotelier is that, yes, it's great to talk about how amazing your hotel is and how great your suites are, but if your message is not tied to your cleaning standards and your protocol, then you're missing the boat, because that's what I'm going to be looking for if I'm traveling, and that's extremely important as we're looking at getting back on track.
Yeah, and the travel corridors, I think, is something that's being trialled in a few different locations across the world. Aloysius, I know there are some travel corridors being talked about between Singapore and Hong Kong, possibly with Australia as well. Can you talk a bit about some of those collaborative efforts, both on the travel corridors, but also you mentioned that you've been piloting face-to-face events. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more around how the community in Southeast Asia has been collaborating to restart.
Thanks, Karina. Yes, we have begun a pilot in terms of the travel bubble between Hong Kong and Singapore, and bearing in mind the respective national healthcare protocols, and also the need to keep a watchful eye on potential community spread. So what has happened is that the respective governments have put in place a set of procedures whereby it doesn't matter whether you're going for leisure or for business events. The trial will entail about 200 passengers on Singapore Airlines and Cathay Pacific flying each way. It will begin on 22nd of November. And of course, when the announcement was made actually yesterday, in less than a few minutes, the seats were all taken up. So you can imagine the pent-up demand, and guys, the pent-up demand is very real. So I think we can't wait for a face-to-face event. But I think in this very calibrated, very gradual process, I think it's necessary for us to also bring back confidence in travel. I think what Elliot has mentioned, it has to involve the entire ecosystem, to the airlines, to the cities, to also the various touch points of the customer journey. I think that's quite key, because at the end of the day, what governments are very concerned about is a potential spike or a second peak of the virus. I think what has happened over the past few months, as economies began to open up more and more, you saw the second peak coming in. And as winter comes in, and also what scientists have noted, notwithstanding the vaccine that we're here, a lot of positive outcomes, it would mutate. And I think that's something that we have to brace ourselves in terms of how the virus would mutate. And therefore, the need to stress test the protocols are going to be key. So the travel bubbles are in that it's meant to really ensure that we've got the process and protocols in place. Alongside with it, and we've tested out pilot events. And also we started off with a small size for 50 people. We're going on to 250, and by the end of the month, we're going to have close to about 2,000 participants. We hope about 20% will come from overseas through the travel bubbles and the green lanes that we have put in place. And I'm glad that Kai is joining us at the end of the month. So Kai, you're going to be our living example, and you're going to tell everybody whether how was the entire experience. But I think these, again, it's a very calibrated move, and for us to think about how do we operationalize these protocols. And this has to do with ensuring we've got the right safety and hygiene standards. We've got the necessary measures to manage density, density management or surveillance matters, as we call them, and also contact tracing. As I mentioned, we always have to be on our guard if there is a sort of a second peak. It's important, therefore, to give our participants confidence that should there be a second case, the ability to contact trace and notify those folks so that they can take the necessary measures is going to be very important. And I think that's what will stand out for destinations to be safe, trusted, and also innovative in the process. So I think that's something which we hope through these pilots and the travel bubbles, we hope to open up the economies within Southeast Asia and of course Pan-Asia as soon as possible.
Thank you, Aloysius. That goes back very well to Susan's point earlier about each part of the ecosystem, the centres, the venues, the destinations, the organisers, associations, really working together to give our attendees confidence that they can attend safely. And talking about safety, Brad, you mentioned earlier the GBAC standards. And be great to hear a little bit more about those standards, what they are, the release of them, and how we can utilise these in our advocacy efforts as well. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. We were fortunate to have found an association of sanitation that had already put together a GBAC program, which stands for Global Biohazard Advisory Council. And that council is made up of epidemiologists who are former CDC and World Health Organization staff. And the council assists organizations and businesses to prepare, respond, recover from biological threats, biohazard situations, and real-time crisis. They offer education and training, certification, which our venues and many other in the hospitality industry are pursuing. Response management, audit of implementing the correct sanitation programs, as well as crisis consulting. So what a great resource that's available to us as it relates to cleaning, disinfection, and restoration. And this is not only about sanitation, but the whole process of proper protocols, following the CDC guidelines, local authorities, et cetera, of which we were able to put together a COVID-19 working group, 28 executives within the meetings and exhibition industry, and put together those guidelines, which we're making available in public as most associations already have. GBAC is an expert third-party accreditation, so this isn't the organization saying we're clean, trust us. So the third-party accreditation that's being adopted by, as I said, many in the hospitality industry, it includes venues, hotels, as it relates to hotels, Hyatt, as a brand has adopted this. Airlines, American Airlines has adopted this. Airports, destinations. So there are several destinations who have all come together and said everybody in the hospitality industry needs to become certified. GBAC gives the industry an opportunity to speak with one voice. Similar to LEED certification, GBAC is similar in nature. There are 20 disciplines that must be met that ensure the best practices subscribed by scientists are properly implemented, and they're implemented to combat biohazard disease particles of any type, including COVID-19. And GBAC gives the industry the opportunity to visit with authorities that set the guidelines of when and how we bring people together in a safe manner. So visiting with them and showing them that it's backed by science, that it does handle the virus in an important way. And it's important for the health departments and officials to understand that program to gain validation from those health officials. So when we follow the science and the industry adopts the GBAC certification, it brings us a step closer to hosting face-to-face events in those areas where we've been unable to do so. And as we all know, trust will be a factor in taking the steps necessary to host live events, and this initiative gives us that safe conformity that can be trusted by our staff, our customers, contractors, health officials, stakeholders, and it reflects the industry's commitment to providing a safe environment for all. If anyone is interested in learning more about GBAC, you can go to gbAC.issa.com, and it will show you everything that GBAC does, and that's also the platform that you go to make application to achieve your certification.
Thank you, Brad. And yeah, I think that's a very important part of the arsenal in terms of those advocacy efforts. And I just want to pick up on something that Aloysius mentioned, which is this pent-up demand. And Kai, UFI recently released the results of interviews conducted amongst 9,000 event professionals, I believe, around the resumption of business events. So could you share with us some of the findings and insights that you gained from that and the potential speed of the recovery that we might be looking for?
Sure, happy to do that. And from personal experience, my own pent-up demand is quite big. I hope to be on a plane to Singapore in a few days. Indeed, it will be my first long haul, my first trip to Asia since January, and it's good to look forward to that. Now we've been polling together with our friends from Explore, participants of trade shows, exhibitors, and attendees around the world to see how they feel, if they actually miss us and miss the face-to-face events. And as you will see on the slide, small minority says digital events can do a better job than physical events or live events, both on the exhibitor side and on the visitor side. So if we listen to our customers, their expectations are very clear, and their verdict is very, very clear. Face-to-face rules over screen-to-screen. And of course, in many ways, the fact that we are seeing these second waves of infections around the world is testament to the need of people to meet and be together, because otherwise no virus could spread. But we can manage that coming together of people with procedures and standards and certifications. So they do want to come back. They miss us, but will they actually bring their money back? So this is a very telling slide. It's focused on the trade show side, but it will be similar on the conference side and other segments of business events. Within 1 to 2 show cycles, the vast majority of players want to bring their expenses and their spendings back to pre-COVID levels. 12%, to be fair, 1/8 of the customers say they do not expect their spendings to ever return to pre-COVID levels. And that's the homework we have. That's the lessons we have to learn from this, how we can enhance face-to-face with digital components. What's the impact it has if people can't meet? Less networking, fewer deals, fewer connections. It's very simple. It's what we feel is what the data shows. They miss the connections, they miss the businesses, and they have empty order books. It's very simple. And what's holding them back right now, and that's in line with everything that has been said here already, what's holding them back right now is not related to the marketplaces and the meeting places. It is solely related to the virus situation. Safety concerns, 70%, travel restrictions, 56%, concerns about possible cancellations and the safety and security of the planning is the third factor that is holding people back right now. So they do want to come back. We will be happy to have them back. And as we are hosting our global UFI Congress this week, and I'm hosting it from the corner of my office, I can't wait to host something again from a real stage. We have the biggest ever number of participants. And yes, we have the most first timers ever. And it's great to have them because they will make connections and then come back face to face to deepen these connections. So there's something to take from this in the sense of never waste a crisis. And as we rebuild the industry and as we grow for many years to come now based on the 2020 baseline, there's a lot we can take from this year's experiences and apply them to face-to-face. Karina.
Thank you, Kai. I'm sure everybody on the panel watching this will be very heartened by those research results, and no more so, I'm sure, Susan, than yourself and the organisations that you represent. As you said, many of them have taken a 70% hit on their revenues. And I'm interested, Susan, in terms of how far associations are planning at the moment and whether there's a general sentiment amongst your members about the timeframe of recovery.
Yeah. Planning is one of the hardest things any of us have to do right now. Associations are no different. And I think it depends on how you would define recovery. To what level? Are we talking about pre-COVID levels of revenue and distribution of revenue? That's not going to happen for a while. And I think it's pretty widely understood that that's going to take a couple of years for all the factors that my colleagues have laid out, especially the things that Kai just shared. But what we need to do is get back on a growth path. And what has happened with associations is we've been forced to pivot not only to virtual, but to other sources of revenue. And our business models are going to be impacted, I think, for the long term as a result of that. You know, when I say that there are associations out there who have maybe up to 70% of revenue coming from a major conference, that probably wasn't a smart business model to begin with. Not to have a much less dependent revenue stream is a risk to any organization. So as a result of a pandemic where we've had to do things quickly, take risks, and accept the fact that perfection is probably not possible, we have developed some new ways of making money. I see those growing. And so now when we can add back in face-to-face meetings, I think what we'll find is that associations in the long run will be stronger, because they will have diversified their revenue, they will have reduced their expenses. We're finding ways to do things with less. And so as organizations, I expect us to be stronger in the long run. But the recovery, the path to recovery is just showing the ability to grow without the face-to-face right now, and then plan it in when all of these signs and signals, particularly attendee confidence, seem to be working in our favor a little bit more than they are right now. Again, we need to have that story about safety, about personal security in making the choice to attend a face-to-face event or meeting. And when we have that story collectively, and we are on our way to creating it, as many of us have pointed out today, then I think we will, we will be able to come back. But, I've heard it said that it may take, up to 2024. 2023 before we really look and feel like we did once before. But again, I go back to the fact that some of these things will forever change us, and maybe for the better. So better, faster, stronger, smarter. But hopefully that's what we'll be.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. And I certainly remember after the tumultuous years around the financial crisis, organizations did come out of that with a more strategic mindset, and the industry was more together than it had ever been. So hopefully those will be some of the green shoots of this recovery. Sue, I know that Freeman also has conducted a study and continuous research really about the recovery of business events. I don't know whether that looks similar to some of the research that Kai shared with us, but it would be great if you could share some of those results.
Yeah, absolutely. Very consistent, very similar. I think we've been doing this every 3 weeks, so it's a tracking study, and our latest results came out before the vaccine news hit, and we were starting to see it was the first time that the reopening dates didn't get pushed back. So, it was sort of late summer, then it was fall, then it was winter. And it seems to be coalescing around, second half of 2021. Now, as Susan said, it's a matter of degree, right? So I don't think anyone is expecting a return to pre-pandemic levels next year, but certainly a path to recovery starting, which, we all desperately need. So.
Well, it's great news to hear that a tracking study that is tracking so frequently is also very similar in its results to the large survey that UFI and Explori have done. So that's great news. I guess one of the main things when we're looking at recovery is around liability and insurance. And so, Chris, I know you've obviously, and you've mentioned you're working very strongly with the UK government. How are event organisers on our side of the pond managing increased risk and liability when they're looking towards the recovery of their events? And are these things universal? Can other parts of the world learn from that?
I think it's an ideal opportunity to rewrite the rule book in many ways. I mean, and I think we should sort of step back. Everybody talks about getting back to what we were. We've never been an industry that's fought to be a single thing. You know, we evolve, we change, we adapt to the needs of our markets. You end up with, you know, big broadcast events that spin off into niche events, and niche events that jump out to broadcast events. So I think that this aspiration to go back to what we were before is sort of somewhat different. Ironically, when I joined AEO 6 years ago, almost to the day, the objective was to diversify your revenue streams and not be so quite reliant on events. It's still a third of our revenue, so we're impacted. But I think that it is quite an interesting opportunity to do lots of other touch points, and, you know, things like this. You know, we'd have never been, you know, asking me to, you know, come over and speak. And you've got Asia, you've got the Americas, you've got Europe. It's a fantastic opportunity to engage a broader audience. So I think those, as Susan mentioned, what things look like is going to change quite a lot. But I think we have some very low rays of light coming through in relation to, I mean, we unfortunately are in a second spike. We are in lockdown. However, the government is still permitting meetings of up to 30 people to happen. I'm thinking and hoping that they'll realise that the economic case is fine if you've proven the safety case. So if you put all those measures in place to create safe environments, you can still trade. So I'm treating this as a golden ticket to our politicians, so they can reopen on the 2nd of December as we come out of lockdown 2.0 or whatever date that is, and actually realise that, like has been mentioned before, we've done pilots events, we've proved the safety case. So that's all really important. But I think what we need to do as well is look at our customers, and our customers, even though it's only a third in Kai's perspective, they're looking for hope as well. They're looking for certainty. They're looking for value. And whilst we're going to have an omni-channel approach to delivering value to them, they need some certainties through. And, you know, gone are the days of a 90% rebook on site, and you get a contract and 50% of the money hits your bank account 4 weeks later. So everybody's going to have to realign. And we had a CEO summit across the venue organizer and supplier community about a month ago, and there's a real re-looking back at risk. You know, looking back at scenario planning, you know, how does that work? How's that going to work for a venue? Looking at that massive liability at certain key points. The same for the venue, the organizer, but also for your customers as well. You know, they're looking for, you know, real value add in terms of attending. What are the extra touch points you can do? You know, it's not just the 2 days of the event anymore. So in the UK, there's much more of a forward thinking in terms of how you can share the risk, share the liability. But we're also looking at, as I know you guys are in the US, looking at some sort of consequential loss insurance with a government-backed scheme to at least, you know, because ultimately the repositioning is really low risk. You know, the government's deciding if it happens or not. They've got their finger on the button. They decide if it's going to pay, and we're well versed in managing risk in terms of the insurance. So we're pretty well progressed in terms of a consequential loss insurance scheme, which will give more confidence to our customer, who's really important. But then if you then mix in all the other aspects, such as the All Secure standard and the successful pilot that we ran that passed government tests in the UK, add that into the vaccines and add that into the testing, you know, I think we need to step back and look at our customers a little bit more, and then look at how the money flows through at the moment, and because it won't look like it did before, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But obviously we've got liabilities to deliver on postponed events, and you've also then got to look at how the cash flows through the system before. And I think the German model is fairly strong insofar as that people sort of share their risks and their costs which is quite a neat way of doing it rather than people hiding behind contracts. So I think collectively we've got a common goal to get going and get going strongly, but I think there's probably more of an awareness about the impacts of that, particularly in the supply chain. I mean, that's really, really hard, the way they generally get paid after the event. It's, you know, that maybe that isn't sufficient anymore. So an opportunity, I think.
Yes, that leads me nicely to Brad, actually, in terms of how the venues are assigning liability and risk, and, you know, are insurance stipulations, for example, changing? And just take yourself off mute.
Boy, how many times have we heard that? And I agree with Chris. You know, this is a topic that could have its own session. We could bring the legal and insurance executives together and have those discussions. But our venues are municipally owned and operated, which are very risk adverse, and they're not, you know, they're not really mobile in making a lot of changes. So many of them are still in the same position. However, with all of us being in the same situation, we're beginning to see that our venues understand that we're collectively at risk and we need to find solutions. You know, until now, infectious disease of this magnitude hasn't been a major concern. And rightly so, everyone is risk adverse and pursuing protection. Insurance companies have yet to offer a solution. You know, if you were fortunate enough to have pandemic insurance prior to the pandemic hitting, you had some coverage, but most of our venues did not have that type of insurance. You know, governments are researching possibilities. We're advocating for them to offer protections at some level, but likely those solutions are not going to come in a timely manner, if at all. The fact that the legal lines have been established for a long period of time, I think what we have to do, and as Chris said, we need to share the risk and find solutions together. And a bright spot of this pandemic has been collaboration on many levels of advocacy, new partnership, open and frequent communication of proper procedures and guidelines being created and changing as we learn more. And working together, that has truly been a great start. And I know it'd be a Herculean task to find the solution together, but the alternative is stagnation, which won't serve any of us well. So everybody's sitting at the table and understanding that we're sharing risk, making sure we're speaking with one voice, we're all following the same protocols, is going to help mitigate that risk and again allow us to move forward in opening the economy and hosting shows.
Thank you, Brad. So we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to come to each of you for a final 30 seconds of wisdom. And first of all, I'd like to ask Susan, we've heard a lot about different sources, there are different sources about the length of the recovery. What are your thoughts about the timeline for the resumption of events?
Sorry. Well, we are banking on some restoration of face-to-face meetings in 2021. We have a conference scheduled, our Marketing, Membership, and Communications Conference, MMCC for short, this spring. And then, of course, we are planning on having our annual meeting as a hybrid event in August. So we're optimistic, although we know that virtual, as I said before, virtual will be on the landscape for some time to come. Not everybody is going to go face-to-face. Either as organizations or as individuals making those decisions. But we're very optimistic that we will have some face-to-face interaction with our members. And then that will help us also with some of the smaller meetings that I think are very manageable because of all of the protocols that have been put in place by destinations, venues, and hotels. I think that is certainly possible. Again, it goes back to people's willingness to travel. So could I say one more thing, Karina, real quickly? One of the things that we're doing, and this is a U.S. thing because of the fact that we're petitioning the government for it, advocating for it, is the Pandemic Risk Insurance Act, that gets passed. That would be a combination of public and private funding to help organizations with the gap that exists between their insurance or no insurance and losses because of a pandemic. for events. So that's a part of what we are advocating for, along with the 501c6 inclusion in the PPP this time, as Elliot mentioned before. Those two things are really at the top of our list to get Congress to move on. And that will help so many associations be whole, even without the kind of insurance we've enjoyed having in the past. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Susan. Elliot, what about you in terms of the timeline for the resumption of events?
You know, same thing that Susan said. Right now, we are unfortunately still experiencing cancellations in 2021, but not in the last part of the last 6 months or so of 2021. So we're very optimistic. We don't know what they will, what they will entail, and that's what we're working on. We've got a hub and spoke model that we're working on with folks like Freeman and other AV companies that are out there to utilize our convention center as well as other venues around the country. So we're banking on that. I'm more optimistic about the leisure traveler returning faster. There's a lot of momentum. People are tired of being at home, and they want a change of environment, even if they're staying in their own backyard, but checking into a hotel just for a change of pace. So we're banking on that. We're extremely optimistic as we look at the change in tide with our president-elect and with Congress. And, right now, U.S. Travel Association is focusing heavily on, the first 100 days of flooding this new Congress with the understanding the importance of this industry, as I referenced earlier. If you didn't think that travel and tourism made a big difference, now when it does not happen in your community and you don't have those revenue sources coming in, you probably are paying a lot more attention to it. So we're optimistic as we're looking at a vaccine, which we see in the news. We're getting closer and closer. That's what we're being told. And in some cases, as it's been referenced, they're being administered from a global perspective. So those things are all positive for us because we know, as Susan referenced as well, the association market and other markets are ready to get back out there and meet. And virtual is fine, but, people are tired of virtual. We want to get back out there, meet in person, and we're seeing the importance of doing what we're doing now, but what we're missing in terms of having face-to-face opportunities to meet and connect.
Great, thank you, Elliot. And Aloysius, maybe in 30 seconds, what about you for the timeline for the resumption of events?
It will take a couple of years, probably up to 2023 to 2025, because of the long-haul travel, especially in Asia. The domestic market will certainly pick up pretty fast, especially for those with larger markets. I think that's going to be roughly the timeline. But I think with the ongoing measures and plus hybrid events, I think that's going to be a cornerstone as companies also review their travel policies and given these insurance considerations, the work from home arrangements, people are going to adjust to some of these digital engagements that we are seeing now. So I think a new normalcy will arise probably in about a couple of years' time.
Thank you, Aloysius. And Kai, what about yourself?
Well, events are taking place. Last week we had a small business-to-business trade show despite the lockdown in East Germany and Erfurt, because it was a trade show for COVID-related issues, and the head of state gave it an emergency license. So shows will be national, regional, international, global, as travel eases up again. I'm also expecting it to be 23, 24 until we get back to COVID levels. Some parts of the world will be there faster, probably China. For some parts it will take longer, probably the more mature markets. In regards to what we can do, we've achieved a lot. Lots of the protocols that governments are implementing are based on frameworks that we have developed as associations. Chris, you mentioned the All Secure standard finding its way into UK government, UK official politics. The German regulations are based on guidance from UFI's global framework as they are in Italy. So we are being heard and we are getting things done. And if we as an industry, every one of us, as we are everywhere, bang the drum and raise our voice and make people aware of how important we are and what kind of local businesses are tied to meetings taking place, then local politicians will notice, regional politicians will notice, and that pressure to national alliances will grow, and then the decisions will come. So, but we'll be back, and we'll be back by 23, 24, hopefully to where we were in 19.
Thank you. Brad, are the venues seeing the timeline the same? Oh, you're on mute again.
Apologize for that. Pretty much the same. You know, the challenge we have in the United States is it's the local authorities. So we have some states, you know, Georgia and Florida and Texas, some other states that have been able to bring in some type of events where people can gather. You know, our association represents stadiums, arenas, performing arts centers, et cetera. And I can tell you that the music industry is, from a touring standpoint, is talking 23 before they can even think about putting together a tour because of the logistics. You know, the economics for most of these events at 50% capacity just doesn't make a lot of sense. But it will be an investment into proving that we can meet collectively, that we will not create spreader events. And that's going to help us move forward sooner than later. And I agree with what's been said. We really do need to get to those authorities and convince them not only on the economics, but our ability to host these events safely, and that we are committed, and that we are an important part of the economy and the ecosystems of the communities that we serve.
Thank you, Brad. And I'd like to give the final word to Sue, Chris and Susan, just to answer very briefly, 30 seconds each, on how we as industry professionals can really voice our support and help with the advocacy efforts that are going on. Maybe, Chris, we can come to you first quickly.
I think it's sharing and demonstrating best practice. So only this morning, I sent over the Singapore-Hong Kong travel corridor to our government. So I think that's really important. Brad, earlier today, Ticketmaster announced you can only book a ticket. Their plan is if you have had the vaccine and had a positive test. So I think as all sharing that information and passing that out is what we can do as a group of associations, and lever those positives to get over the negatives, but come back stronger. I'm pleased you didn't ask me the date question, Karina, because we had one and we lost it, and it should be our Excellence Awards on a rearranged date for the 4th of December, and we're going virtual. So thanks for not asking me that one. But I think unity, sharing best practice, collaboration, and as I say, I've only been in the industry 25 years and I've never seen anything quite off the chart as what we've seen. So if that's a legacy from this, that's good for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Sue?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate what's been said on this discussion, I think, you know, continuing to emphasize the critical role that we play in economic recovery, given the depth and breadth of our ecosystem across all industries and geographies. And then, you know, so helping legislators understand that our importance to economic recovery, and then coupled with our ability to safely reopen. So I think impact and safety are just the things we need to continue to bang the drum on.
Thank you. And a final word to you, Susan. And you're on mute.
I think it's been said very well by my colleagues, but just to build on that and be specific, where there are efforts on the behalf of associations and destinations in the U.S. to get the inclusion in the Paycheck Protection Program and get this pandemic risk insurance passed. Those efforts, and that many coalitions are pursuing that. ASAE has sign-on letters. Get behind it and push. Otherwise, I agree completely with Chris, and that is that it's really going to be sharing effective practices. In this environment, the most credibility is peer-to-peer learning. And that's how people are really getting to know what other people are doing, what's effective. And I've never seen sharing like is going on right now, both from a learning point of view as well as operational and every aspect of running a business. So I think that's going to be part of what saves us, quite frankly, and will emerge with a whole new way of operating. And I think that's exciting.
Thank you very much, Susan. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this fabulous panel. Thank you all for your time and for your expertise. I'm sure that the audience has appreciated that. And on behalf of EIC, thank you very much.
Thank you, Karina.
Thank you.